If he's running around, you need an arrow rest that fully kind of holds the arrow in place. It looks like it's almost like just like cupping the arrow from the bottom. You would want more of a whisker biscuit or something to hold that in place. So poison gas is nothing that I've ever seen. If you go through like hunting school, that is not something that you use. Arrow on fire, which is all for destruction. He's not hunting or trying to harvest anything. Hi, my name's Alexandra Eisner, and I've been an archery professional for 2 years now. In that time, I have both competed in national events and local, as well as trained over 400 people ages 3 to 80 in how to shoot recurve, longbow, and compound archery. I'm a level 2 USA archery instructor trainer and have also made an archery coloring book. All right, let's get into it. All right, so we got a samurai. Okay, he's shooting a more Mongolian type of bow. So at the top, you'll see that the limbs are actually more curved than what would be a longbow, where the limbs are not touching the string. The limbs are touching the string at both sides of the bow right now, which means that the arrows will actually fly a little bit faster, and we should see him pull actually almost past his cheek, past where someone with a longbow would pull the arrow back to, and he's gonna probably be pulling it more to the side of his cheek rather than up to his face. So he's running with the bow, which this bow weighs maybe a pound, so it would be very easy to run with. The bow is shorter than like the 77-inch traditional longbows, so that would be easier. He's using the bow straight up and down right now, which would be okay, but he is still shooting off of his hand. He's kind of has his elbow out a little bit, which you would want to draw the bow more straight back. That would get you a little bit more momentum, but he's still at eye level, which is exactly what you would want. There's no sights on these bows, so you want the arrow to be at eye level so that you could actually aim a bit with this. He is shooting downhill right now because obviously he's at a higher level, which would be accurate. Jumping around with this bow again because it's so light and shorter, that would be much easier. That would be hard to roll it around, especially if you have a back quiver on. That's what I would say would get in the way if you're gonna roll with it. Your arrows are probably gonna fall out unless he has the arrows actually strapped in or kind of punched into a certain hole that's actually holding the arrows in the quiver. I can't truly tell if he's using broadhead points or normal tip points. It looks like they're probably normal points right now. He's not necessarily hunting. However, back in the day, because they didn't really just practice per se, a lot of the points were naturally bigger points and heavier points. So if he's not using a broadhead, which is a big guy like this, then he's most likely using a very long and heavy point like this. So Mongolian and horsebow type of archery is a type of archery that you would do fast shooting with. You would just pull it out and go and go and go. And that is correct for the Mongolian horsebow type of archery. So it looks like she has a back quiver as well. We have longer shots here. It looks like she has some kind of vision to see those farther shots without even using a bino. So we're in attack mode. We're not necessarily harvesting, hunting animals. It looks like this is a war with other people. Is that a crossbow, it looks like? Oh no, she's tilting the bow. Okay, so she's canting the bow. You would never be able to load a crossbow, first off, with just your hand. Those things are actually pushing out about 400 to 500 feet per second arrows, and those types of pressure with that much pushing out, you would actually want very, very short arrows. They're called bolts. Now we have what looks more to be a crossbow. In the front, you could see the limbs are smaller, but they're curved. So it's funny because a crossbow almost looks like a recurve, but it's super tiny at the front part. It's still curved, and that's because of the limbs that you're pulling it back. Oh, now it's a different type of bow. Okay, so this bow is a bit shorter, and this one is a little bit iffy to me because if you look at where the string meets the limb is completely curved into the string. Even a longbow, the limbs are not curved into the string. They're almost at a triangle. But in a recurve, you have the string that hits the limb. So it almost looks like she has her bow strung the other way. So if you see this curve on the bow, it's supposed to be hitting the string. It almost looks like she has this bow strung backwards right now. So if you look and see too where the string distance is from her handle, where she's gripping the bow, it's extremely wide. That looks like almost like a foot long. So what I'm saying right here, that's where her grip is on the bow, and then the distance from the grip to the string is very long. Right here, the normal distance is about 7 to 8 inches, and that's so that you have the right amount of pressure pushing out from the bow. Lara Croft, I believe, Tomb Raider. See what she's got going on. Whoa. Spider-like. She's got a bow on the back of her. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so this is a more modern bow, or depicting a more modern bow. She has gloves on both hands, so that's correct because this is probably a very snappy, fast bow. It looked like she was shooting a very heavy rope. That would mean that she needs to be shooting at least probably 200 to 400 feet per second in order for that rope to actually stay before dropping the arrow, because that rope has to weigh a lot, and to shoot that far and to get it to stick, she must be pulling some high poundage right now. So poison gas is nothing that I've ever seen. If you go through like hunting school, that is not something that you use. You don't use poison gas, you don't use poison tips, you don't use dynamite. It's really only broadheads that are truly allowed when you're ethically hunting. Now we have kind of a more traditional bow. It looks like a traditional longbow. I didn't see any cams or wheels. It looked like the string and the riser were more at an angle, so which would be correct, but because the riser and the string wasn't hitting itself, it looks like this is a longbow. If she's now like in the wild forging on her own and she had to make a bow on her own, that's the kind of bow you would make. So at least right now when she's pulling it down, she has it closer to her cheek so that she can aim better, and she is aiming at a higher angle. He is taller than her right now. So if she was pulling down here, that would be accurate because she's shooting in an incline right now.
There's ammo in there and we can't afford.
So we're shooting. Oh, I see the target down below. So that might be why now she has her elbow up higher, because now the target's down or straight. So she knows, as hopefully a good archer, she's not going to pull down because she's going to shoot up. She has her target straight. And so now that's why she pulled straight back to her anchor point. Her elbow was more straight with the arrow. And then all together, to keep your form in check so you have good shots, you're gonna just angle down all together once you're there, which is what she did. So we have gone back in time quite a bit. Wow, there are some horns on that bow, and it's a very small, compact bow, which is interesting. Arrow on fire, which is all for destruction. He's not hunting or trying to harvest anything. He's just at war right now, obviously. He has his back quiver there, which would be correct for these days. They didn't have side quivers or pocket quivers. It was all either attached to the bow or on the back. Running around with this bow would again be no problem, except he did have horns on it, so I would be cautious to run around with sharp objects that you could just fall on, but he does have armor. Even if you were like 100 feet away from somebody, if you were shooting a longbow and you had that armor on you, even with medieval type of points, you very well would most likely not actually pierce that armor. It was incredibly strong. Mongolian bows, as well as English longbows and Turkish bows, which kind of match the Mongolian bows, all came around at this similar times. So this is just at war. He's obviously in another kind of land with some other people, and so that would make sense to have a more hybrid-esque bow, where he looks like he's maybe from like the European side, but he looks like he's in another country or another land, where instead of the longbows being more available, it would be more of the Turkish or the Mongolian bows that are available. So running around, wow, we have a very long bow. Very long bow, man. Okay. The average is around 77 inches, give or take, but they could be as long or short as someone would want to make it. The longer the bow is, actually, the more forgiveness you have in your shots. So he may be smart in wanting to make it a longer bow, especially if it's still a long bow, since the long bows are the bows that are hardest, arguably the hardest to be the most accurate with. He has a backpack. I'm sure that that's where the quiver is with the arrows, but probably see a little bit. Oh, yep. So he just pulled the arrow out of his backpack. So that's it, where he stashes his quivers. I would just wonder again how tight the arrows are locked down inside of there. If he's going to be jumping over buildings and crawling around, that would be very difficult to do. To jump out of a window and shoot someone at the same time, one, you need to be extremely ready, and you would have to have so much practice. Like, this person would need to be shooting from when they were like 4 to get to a level as that. It's more of like a trick shot, if you will. So that makes total sense that it would be in a video game. Trick shots people get excited about because you wouldn't really do it in real life, and it's just because, one, you wouldn't have really any accuracy. 2, I can't even imagine pulling back a bow when you have no foundation. Your feet are not planted. That means that you are not utilizing any other muscles really in your body except for your arms. So if that bow was very high weight, that would be extremely difficult to pull back based on just that you have no foundation to shoot from. So that's just an incredible trick shot, if you will. Oh, so we're in a compound now. Okay, now we have an actual arrow rest too. Cable guards, that would all be correct. The riser, it has the opening for the shelf. That's perfect. In his sight, I can't really tell too much. It looks like it's almost crosshairs, like a rifle scope rather than pin sight, which is what you would use for like a bow hunting compound. It's almost more like a scope, which I could understand a little bit. This seems like a more army-esque game, so maybe they're trying to kind of get people involved who are more familiar with the scope look rather than the actual sight look on bow hunters. That arrow is clipped onto the string. It's on that arrow rest. That arrow is not going anywhere. He could move around, run, jump with this bow, and that arrow should not fall off. Looks like he has a broadhead on the point of his arrow, which a broadhead is the bigger kind of sharp blades. So he's definitely in, kind of, you could say, offense mode, kind of attack mode, not necessarily hunting, but obviously in a war situation. It looks like he's using possibly feather fletchings. That fletching is called your index, and that should actually be facing up. His arrows need to be positioned in a certain way on that arrow rest in order for the arrow to fly past it. So his arrow fletchings need to be plastic. His index is facing right now kind of down and to the side, which it looks like could pass through the arrow rest, but that is actually to tell the archers where to position your arrow so that it goes through the rest. Oh, now we got a crossbow. Awesome. So the crossbow, you would have a sight like that. It would be more of a scopy type of sight. It looked like the strings were coming straight back. Yep. The limbs are curved more up front. It kind of looks like, it reminds me of like a viper. It's very kind of stealthy, these crossbows, which is awesome. I was about to say, that thing right behind his scope looked like it was a battery for almost like a light or something, which we just showed that it was. You would not shoot a compound canted at all. Compounds you are meant to be very straight up and down. That's also kind of what's missing from what I could see on his sight. Generally, any compound sight, you have a bubble, you have a level on your sight, and that's because the more that you tilt your bow in one direction, such to the right, your arrow's gonna go right, and the same thing with the left. And compounds, you don't really need to play with that because your arrow's already being held, not your hand's not holding it. You don't need to tilt your bow. So he should have a level on that sight, and he should be shooting it straight up and down, not tilted. It looks like almost a Mongolian-esque type of bow. He's shooting off of his hand. He's shooting with fingers though, which that's not how you would shoot a Mongolian bow. So it's some kind of a hybrid right now. As Mongolians, they would actually, and the Turkish, just with these horse bows, you would actually have the string in your thumb and pull it back that way rather than with your fingers. And if you were shooting it with your fingers, you would want to use 3 fingers, not 2. That's going to be very hard on your hand. And I think it's interesting that his front hand with the bow grip, there's a place where he can shoot off of it. He has a glove on that front, but on the back he has nothing to protect his fingers, and you would want a glove to protect your fingers. So running around with this bow would be very easy. It's a lighter bow. Actually, he has a hook on his back. He's not just putting the bow around him. He actually has a hook on the back to hook the bow on. His arrows look correct. He's shooting wood arrows with a wood bow. He has 3 fletchings on him. He's actually even put the fletching in the proper direction on the string. If you look, he has one of the fletchings that's facing away from the riser. That is what you want so that when the arrow passes the riser, you have the least resistance in your shot. So he has the arrow set correctly on his string. Arrows being on fire is not realistic in the way of you would probably want a full glove on that front hand, not just a glove that covers the arrow rest part, because one, that's gonna burn you and probably burn the bow. So that arrow, if he were to use that and for some trick shot or defense, you would need a very long arrow. Typically the longest arrows nowadays are about 32 inches long. He would need something longer than that. Now we're on a crossbow, a very older style crossbow. I could see them using a thicker string for a crossbow like this because you have a lot of pressure into it. He's using this crossbow now because he's at a farther distance, which makes sense. Well, maybe nowadays the crossbows shoot like 400, 500 feet per second. Back in the day with this, they wouldn't. But I would just hope that he's not using the same arrows that he was using with the last bow. And I say that because they're the same fletchings as what he was using with the last bow. That wouldn't work. If he's using the same arrows now as he was with the other ones, these ones would break because, as I mentioned, the other ones, because they were on fire and he's pulling past his cheek, they need to be at least 32, if not like 40 inches long. But the longer the arrow is, the more bend and flex you're gonna have into it. He's now pushing out a lot more pressure into that arrow with the crossbow. That arrow would break. You can't go back and forth using an arrow between different types of equipment like that. So that's interesting that he would pick a longbow for horseback and not use the horsebow for horseback, but it could still work. It would be harder because longbows, you want to put more of your body into it, and you can't do that on a horse, so that would be harder. But this is actually what he's shooting. This is the best string on a bow that I've seen. Okay, so we are back with it. Something with the sight. It looks like an ILF recurve bow possibly. So he has limb pockets. If you see above the sight, there's a limb that goes into a pocket and there's bolts that screw it down. So you know from that that's either an ILF type of recurve bow or it's a compound bow. It looks like it's trying to mimic what we call a bow hunter sight. So he has set pins Typically the pins are 3 to 5. Some people like 7 pins, but they're set for specific yardages. That's really cool. I wish they had that nowadays. So his sight right now, if you see it glowing red, there's pins in the middle, and each pin, when he zooms in, it says an actual yardage on the sight itself. They do have some sights nowadays that have a rangefinder in the sight itself, but they're massive. They're huge. They're like, you know, the size like like both of my hands, and they're very, very heavy. They're very expensive. Those sights could range from like $500 to $2,000. And if you are actually trying to hunt, in a lot of states, they are banned. If he's running around, you need an arrow rest that fully kind of holds the arrow in place. It looks like it's almost like just like cupping the arrow from the bottom. You would want more of a whisker biscuit or something to hold that in place. I'm assuming that he is using more of an ILF recurve bow because I haven't seen like complete whole picture yet. I assume that because he is tilting the bow so much right now. You would not do that with a compound bow. He is shooting correctly. The arrow's on the left side of the riser and he's pulling with his right hand. The arrow looks pretty far away from his fingers even when he pulls it back, which is good. Using broadheads and things like that, you don't want broadhead should not just be like hovering over your fingers. If you're going to use a broadhead, then you need it to be probably about 3 inches to be away from you, because especially if you're not using a compound and you're using a recurve where you can pull it back even more on accident, you want to give yourself room for those accidents so that you don't hit your own hand. So we have another neat sight and a pretty cool looking color bow. So that means that we're talking in a little bit more modern times now. You can tell that that bow is, since it's glistening and it actually has holes in the riser, that looks like a slightly heavier riser bow. It could either be carbon fiber, aluminum, or a lot of people nowadays are using cast iron. This is a takedown ILF recurve bow. It has a sight on it. So it's funny because putting a sight on an ILF recurve bow, you're kind of going into like Olympic category. This is almost like a Hawkeye type of bow right now. And being that way, you can shoot with the bow being sideways. You would want a glove on both hands, which is what he's doing. That string looks like it's twisted okay. You would want to have it more braided rather than twisted, kind of like that. It looks a little bit thicker for what this bow needs as far as this string. It's missing the serving in the middle of the string, but that's okay. The serving's just to protect this string. This guy probably made the string himself, but I don't know why, if you can't get a modern bow, get a modern string, but that's okay. So when you're using a sight, you have your first axis, your second axis, and your third axis. So that's what the levels on the sight help with, and I don't see that. So he really is kind of missing a key part in his equipment right now. He would have a lot better accurate shots if he would shoot the bow straight up and down. I thought it was super cool. I mean, I don't play a lot of video games. I really didn't know what to expect, but it's awesome to see that what's being depicted is a huge variety between the horse bows and long bows and different types of long bows and different types of horse bows and what they're doing with it, whether they're running around or jumping on horses, whether they're stalking prey and hunting, or actually in a war zone using broadheads and dynamite. I thought that for the most part, they actually depicted them very well, but would be super cool if that type of equipment was around nowadays. For more experts react, subscribe to Gamology. For more Gamology videos, head over to Facebook and YouTube. Sorry, my camera moved.
Yeah. I noticed that as well.
For more experts react, subscribe to Gamology. Sorry, I need to do that one over. I don't know why
No
I
worries.
get tongue twisted with that one.